Environment and Transportation Committee of this cycle. So welcome along, everyone. Kirsty, have we got any apologies?
I've got no apologies intimated at this time.
Is anyone else? Willie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, apologies from Junaid Ashraf. And I've just noticed that Annette Valentine's going to be using Alan Valentine's laptop there. So Annette is in the meeting, but she's using Alan's equipment.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other further apologies, colleagues? Don't see MD. Can I remind you all to keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking, and we'll get through the business as quickly as possible today. Now, moving on to declarations of interest in terms of ethical standards in public life. Have we got any? Don't see anyone, don't see anybody in the chat bar. So is it fair to say then we can move on to item 2, which is the programme of works in the country parks. Now this is here for noting, but I'm going to ask Nicole to give us a quick run through of this because it's a very important paper. Nicole, please.
Thank you very much, convener. Yes, indeed, members will recall the previous programme of work updates on Country Parks of the Future provided in November 2020 and May 2021. So this report is a further in that series to really provide a further update on the range of development work which has been undertaken to deliver Country Parks of the Future. This includes updates on progress across all 3 country parks and on a range of initiatives and projects. So it focuses on the work at Strathclyde Park to progress potential for renewable energy from green space, the ongoing work to deliver a gateway to the country park at Bells Hill, centred around new cycling facilities, the works contributing to the Council's aim to reach net zero by 2030, as well as provide an update to our key assets, providing improvements to health, well-being for the entire community. The report also includes a range of updates on changed access arrangements and visitor facilities in Strathclyde Park, together with the introduction of a food festival planned for summer 2022. Convener, there are a range of recommendations for the committee, which I would point them to. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Councillor Goldie-Willie.
Thanks, convener. A couple of comments and then just a couple of questions. Really welcome this report. It looks fantastic. I'm good to see the development of Green Park Green Power, and hopefully we get a positive outcome in the bid for the Green Growth Accelerator. Park Power will be excellent if we can produce energy for local housing, schools, community facilities, and it will aid us towards our net zero target at 2030. It's also the opportunity we have to improve outdoor education within the park's good, and the food festival's good. Just on to a couple of questions. Page 5, I take it would be one COVID memorial throughout the authority, and if so, where will it be? If it's not been chosen yet, how will it be chosen? Couple of questions on the park access at 2.14 and 2.15. That's for both Drumpellier and Strathclyde. And are we satisfied? And I know we've done additional consultation that's now been extensive enough for us to reach a settled conclusion. And the final point is on 2.18. Really disappointing we're losing the disabled toilets because of vandalism. It's absolutely crazy. It's just to see if we've had any approaches or any consultation with disabled groups to see whether the facilities that we are going to provide just now and in the future will be adequate. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Willie. A lot of good questions in there. Nicole?
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Goldie, for the questions. First of all, I'll start with the first question in terms of the COVID memorial. So yes, the memorial is planned for one location. What I would say is that we've had a number of approaches recently from different communities who may wish to commemorate the deaths of friends and family from COVID within their own local environment. But this particular project is funded by Scottish Government and is led by teams from Green Space Scotland, and they are indeed discussing with each local authority one particular COVID memorial. So in our case, and it's mentioned in the report in terms of an art park being created at Strathclyde Park, members will recall that that was part of the wider master plan aspiration. So the view would be that whatever form this memorial takes, and I have to really caveat this by saying it's not like a war memorial. That's not the intention. The memorial will take whichever artistic form local people feel is appropriate across North Lanarkshire. So the intention at this point, unless we hear very strongly otherwise from our communities, is that there will be a full consultation in this. There will be a local artist appointed. And we've started to go through that process, and people from across North Lanarkshire will get the opportunity to feed into this particular memorial. The second question, in terms of the consultation, in terms of access to the park, Councillor Goldie is absolutely right. We've had a couple of different consultations. The latest one was extremely extensive and focused on park-wide consultations, which also included access. Members will see from 2.14 and 2.15, that particularly 2.15, that the results were fairly unanimous in terms of how park users felt in terms of the park when this access route is closed. Again, I'd like to point out to members that although we often talk about particularly the road through Strathclyde Park as a road, indeed it is not classified as a road. It is and has always been an access route, although I appreciate that some people cut through the park. That obviously hasn't been possible over the last 2 years. And in terms of the survey at 2.15, members will see that over 85% of visitors felt that the park was safer following closure of the route to vehicles. 74% felt it was quieter and more peaceful, bearing in mind the benefits that we hope it brings in terms of health and well-being. 77% felt the park was better for recreation without cars driving through the park, and 79% agreed that there was less antisocial behaviour. Granted, in terms of that final point, 17% of people still found it harder to get places with the route shut to cars, but the majority felt that opening up the beach car park had helped with access. And indeed, in terms of any questions that we've had from members of the public over access to the cemetery or actually using the park as a shortcut, we have provided them with the alternative routes, which the team have checked and aren't any longer. And indeed, we've provided some upgrades to those routes to make sure that they are of a similar quality to that going through Strathclyde Park. Again, just to point out that it is not a road, but simply an access route to the park. And finally, without drawing breath, if I move on to the disabled toilets question, indeed it is unfortunate. Members will see in 2.18 that since November 2018, and it's not about one particular bout of vandalism to these toilets. Indeed, it has been repeated and prolonged over a number of years. And indeed, members will be aware that these toilets sit remote from the main visitor facilities in the park at the Water Sports Centre. So indeed, the decision has been taken to remove these toilets, again, based on feedback from customers at the park, and to centre those as they have been since November 2018, and indeed in any bout of vandalism before that, to centre them on the water sports facilities, where members will be aware that there is a lift and disabled toilets which are kept clean and very well maintained, which also provides additional access to the cafe and the wider water sports centre as well. So that would be our continued intention, until, of course, we have funding potentially from the Green Growth Accelerator and we work to develop other aspects of the master plan, when absolutely accessible toilet facilities are included within there for a range of modern requirements. Members will be aware the park and the Water Sports Centre is a 1975 asset, so indeed there is much which is somewhat outdated and unfortunately not fit for customers currently, but that's what we're working on in terms of the master plan. So the update here is to get us to a point in time and gain the agreement of members, and of course we'll bring back other updates on aspects of the master plan as they're developed, including accessible toilet facilities. I hope that answers all three questions.
Thanks for that, Nicole, and I see thumbs up there from Councillor Goldie. Thanks, Willie. Councillor Hogg, Paddy.
Thank you, Katrina. Just to again welcome the report and thank Nicole and staff for all the detail. And it's great to see all the progress being made, parks, and particularly Palace Rig with the community asset transfer as well. Just a question on 219, the food festival. Just, is this an opportunity for local businesses and ourselves to maybe help encourage food and the importance of nutrition and health? Obviously, the parks, we're getting people out to walk in nature, and that's got positive health benefits as well after what everyone's been through in the last 2-3 years. But it would be good to see a link in with health and nutrition if that's possible, and further feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. But Nicole, can you maybe come in and enlighten us on that, please?
Yes, it absolutely is. As Councillor Hogg points out, firstly, there was an aspiration that we start to have more pop-up activities in the park and bring more life to the park in terms of different events, bring more visitors to the park. So the Food Festival is one such opportunity. Can I reassure members that the Food Festival is absolutely about high quality food, ideally locally produced food. It will give an opportunity for a showcase in terms of local producers. It is linked into Food for Life. In terms of our schools and the offer at schools. There will be activity-based programmes around the Food Festival as well, so that we bring as many people in and we get that link between physical activity and good nutrition. So it's really providing a showcase for particularly local suppliers, and as I say, trying to focus on a pop-up event within the park. So very much it's still under development. And the hope would be that if this is a successful event that we can bring to Strathclyde Park, that we would start to push these out to other communities as well. So other assets such as Summerlee, Pallasrigg, Dropellier, and so on and so forth. So yes.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Paddy, you okay with that? Yeah, I can see you. Right, that's fine. Colleagues, I don't see anybody else in the chat bar. So can I then ask you to note the recommendations?
I've put my hand up.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Jim. I was looking at the right, Jim. On you go.
Just a point again on 216, the police statistics regarding the decrease of 57.1% in crime. Now, most of that was during the lockdown when nobody was allowed in the park anyway. So I don't think that would be an accurate figure. I think we should get another figure once we get back to normality on that, because it just seems an awful lot just because our roads shut. You know, and I just feel that's not an accurate figure that they're giving us. I know it's a figure they're giving us, but it's during a lockdown and nobody's doing the park anyway during that. Thanks.
Nicole, would you want to come in and answer that, please?
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you for the question, Councillor Redden. So what I would point out is that our parks and green spaces, but particularly in Strathclyde, Dropellier and Pallasrigg Park, the parks have never closed during the pandemic. So there has never been a time when the parks are closed. And in fact, right from the outset, we have encouraged as many people as possible within obviously the rules at the time, to enter our parks, to go for a walk, to enjoy green spaces, to take some time for quiet reflection, to get some exercise and so on and so forth. And in fact, what we've seen is a substantial increase, and I'm more than happy to find out what that increase looks like for members and share it, but a very substantial increase in the use of the parks, and indeed much more feedback to the Parks and Green Space team on the quality of our parks and green spaces and the benefits in terms of health and well-being that they've brought to people during the lockdown. So from my perspective, far from the parks being less busy, in fact, we've seen a very substantial, prolonged and increased use, which is absolutely fantastic, again, from our perspective. But just to point out on that particular factor, the police, despite all that, all those additional visitors, despite that additional use, what the police are saying is the closure of that through route, dare I say, rat run, which increases not only the accessibility of the park to enable antisocial behaviour, but enable access to other places to hide within the park to carry out that antisocial behaviour. So I think the statistic most likely is representative of the fact that we are discouraging antisocial behaviour within the park, particularly around races, which previously were seen on a quite regular basis around the park. I hope that assists.
Okay, thanks for that, Nicole. Now, I don't see any hands up, or I don't see anything in the chat bar. So, colleagues, can I point us to recommendations for noting in page 5, and we're happy to note this report. I see thumbs up. Thank you. So that will take us on to item 3, and it's a strategic performance framework, public sector duties, climate change report. Now, again, this is here for noting, colleagues, but it's a very important report as well. So I'm going to ask James McKinstry to say a few words on it. James.
Thanks very much, convener. The purpose report is to provide committee with a summary of a return that we make on an annual basis under the public sector climate change duties reporting framework. In summary, our carbon emissions have reduced, and this return relates for 2020-2021, and in summary, our carbon emissions reduced by just under 22% from the previous year, and the cumulative reduction from our baseline year of 2015-16 was sitting at 48%, and that's exceeding our targets that was set in the council to date. Paragraph 2.2.2 in the report highlights a number of factors that can obviously impact on the performance. For example, weather conditions, the change in use of our buildings, the demands for services, the council's policy decisions which are made, and also areas such as improved recycling rates within the council area as well. And paragraph 2.2.3 lists what are the main sources of emissions within the council, these being natural gas, electricity, waste to landfill, and fleet use of diesel. You'll see in the table in paragraph 2.4 that we've reduced all of these areas over the last 5 years, and in particular you ask you to note the reduction attributable to waste in that table. Paragraph 2.2.5 advises that the closure of buildings as a result of COVID has obviously had an impact on our reductions, but committee should also be aware that other factors that we were doing before the start of the pandemic and doing throughout the pandemic and will continue to do as we go forward, such as energy improvements across our estate, and also building rationalisation has contributed as well significantly to reductions in these areas. Moving forward, looking at the next steps, we continue to set annual reduction targets within the council, which tie in with our own climate emergency declaration, and we'll continue to manage and monitor them. And we'll also be looking at collating a report to bring back to committee after the elections to show where we are with that, particularly as we moving forward to 2030, and most importantly whether a level of resources which we have available to us will continue to sustain the level of improvements that we've been making, and we can continue to make them going forward. So in conclusion, I think what the report does, it shows that we're still making really good progress in reducing our carbon emissions within the council. We are achieving the targets that we're setting, but as we go forward, targets will become harder, will become tighter, and we do need to look at the level of resources that we're allocating to this as we go forward. And the recommendations are contained in page 15 of your agenda.
Thanks for that, James. Willie, Councillor Goldie.
Thanks, Convener. I'm probably going to be really unfair on James here and asking me to get a crystal ball out, so I'll apologise before I ask this one. There's also another question, Bill. We've obviously got a drop in energy usage across the council because of home working. When we return, fingers crossed soon, post-pandemic, do you think we've put enough mitigation measures in to reduce our energy consumption across the council estate? But I know we can't judge it against last year's figures or so, but against the figures a year or so back, and I realise it is ambitious targets we've made. The other question is, it's on Appendix 1, and Andrew McPherson clarified it a bit for me the other day there. It would appear that there's an increase in commercial and industrial refuge to landfill. Now, Andrew's assured me it's not North Lanarkshire Council landfill, it's commercial across the authority. And the question is really, are there other landfill sites not controlled by NLC? And if they are, how are these licensed and monitored? Because if we know there's an increase going to landfill, we must have some kind of idea of where the figures are. I know that's maybe a bit convoluted to that, but it's just essentially, why is there an increase in commercial and industrial refuge to landfill? I don't know if we can answer it, but it'd be an interesting question. Thanks. Thanks, Convener.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. James, James then Andrew, if possible. Thanks.
Yeah, in relation to your first question, yeah, there has been a drop in energy because of COVID, but there was drops in energy consumption pre-COVID as well. Got to remember as well that through big parts of the last 2 years as well, our school buildings have been open as well, and so it's not all of our buildings that have been closed, but we did have plans in place for how we reduce energy. We have allowance within the capital plan, the current 5-year capital plan, for continuing to make improvements on energy. So I think we will continue to see a reduction. It may be what we'll see in the next year. We might see an increase, and then we might see a reduction going forward. But that's important about the point I was making about the next stages. In terms, we need to, if you like, take stock where we are and where we're going as we go forward. But I think like a lot of public sector organisations, we have been making really good progress, and I think we can go forward with confidence that we'll continue to make progress across all of the areas. And indeed, as we return people to the buildings as well, personal energy consumption will come down as well. So there's an offset, if that makes sense.
Okay, Andrew, do you want to come in the second part of that, please?
Yep, I can indeed. And further to the previous discussion, I did sort of seek further clarification on this, Councillor Goldie. So the actual volumes that are going of commercial waste that are going to landfill have actually decreased. But what has happened is the actual figure that's utilised to calculate the carbon impact has increased significantly. It's increased fivefold. So although the levels of waste are going down, because the actual coefficient, if you like, is increased, it actually looks as if the carbon dioxide levels are going up.
Okay, you happy with that, Willie? Any further questions or comments, colleagues? Can't see any in the chat bar. So are we happy to note the contents of this report? Great, okay, thank you. Moving on to item 4, where we've got the climate plan, Action on Climate Together 2030, and it's page 23 to 42. James, I think you're going to say a few words on this. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll be very brief in this one, convener, because the committee will recall that we previously presented a draft climate plan to this committee. I think it was in September of last year, and we sought approval at that time to go out and do a period of public engagement on the draft plan, and we've done that public engagement. And what we're doing is we're presenting to committee the final plan, which is quite a bit shorter than the one that was drafted, and that was reflective of the feedback that we've got, and it was actually. And also to make it more accessible, more easy to follow as well. It's quite a technical subject at times, climate change and the whole carbon management agenda. So we've made the changes there. What we'll do as we go forward, we'll keep the plan kept under review, and we will develop, and we are developing a suite of actions as detailed in the bullet points in paragraph 2.1 of your report. And the plan, which is attached to the report as an appendix, is more heavily focused in the areas highlighted in paragraph 2.3 of the report, and going forward we'll continue to monitor and develop the plan, including a regular review of the actions and the annual target reductions, and we'll come back to committee and report progress on an annual basis as we regularly do.
Thanks for that, James. I don't see any questions in the... Oh, sorry, Willie. On you come, Willie.
Convener, it's me again. Essentially, I really welcome the report here. Just looking for a wee bit of guidance on the potential to have to offset carbon. How would an organisation like the council offset? I'm hoping we're not going to be in a position where we do have to offset. It's just to see how that would be. Would you pay money or whatever else of that? And the other point is really pleased we're moving to electric light goods vehicle fleets. We'll wait for interest, maybe greener carbon for HGVs. The other question is, with the new vehicles that are coming in, are we confident that our electric charge points, both for council vehicles, and I know with the project with Scottish Power, etc., that are keeping up with anything that's required? I had a brief conversation with Nicole about this, but it's just to see whether there's any changes and whether we would need to change charge points at that to keep our vehicles charged.
Willie, James?
I think there's two questions there. I think the first question in relation to offsetting, we don't have any plans to do any offsetting at the present time. I think to kind of try to approach it correctly, offsetting shouldn't necessarily be at the forefront of what your planning is. You can do, the things as you suggested there in terms, there is ways in which you can make financial contributions, and you can do other things as well as planting trees, etc. But planting trees should always be part of our strategy anyway. Those of you who are members of the Policy and Strategy Committee will be aware that we gave a very thorough report to the Policy and Strategy Committee in December as to all the kind of actions that were taken. In relation to your second point, electrical charging points, you know, they are getting kept up to date, but the challenge is it's with this new technology, it keeps changing, and we're working very closely with the Coles team, and you know, we are doing things like, for example, in the new town and community hubs, some of which are in construction at the moment. They will be charging points in there as well, so we do have a specification. We do have a scope as well for that, and we keep that under review as we go forward. But we're very much aware that, you know, this is an area of technology that's constantly changing, and actually as we come to the point where we can't buy fossil fuel cars, if you like, that, you know, that's an area that will have to be ramped up going forward.
Thanks for that, Will. Are you okay with that? Yep, okay. Paddy Hogg. Paddy.
Thanks. It's more of an observation than anything else, and it's just to make a comment that whilst, of course, thanking James for his, as usual, high standards and efficiency and professionalism in putting this together, and the council moving towards basically what we're instructed to do through regulations, I just want to make a statement that as the person who moved the climate emergency motion a few years ago, I have since looked into what was basically an assumption that I took to be true, that CO2 is the key driver of climate change, and I've since changed views because there's considerable amount of science out there to suggest that, particularly new stuff from Professor Zarkova, that the sun is the most powerful driver of climate change, and CO2 is exaggerated. So, and I've actually invited Professor Zarkova to come and speak in Scotland and Glasgow in the next few months. So I just thought I'd make the observation that I am now a climate skeptic when it comes to CO2, but I'm aware that the council have got regulations to follow and will do a fantastic job in that. Notwithstanding, I think all of us are environmentalists. We want to see less pollution. We want to see our environment improved and people getting out to these spaces. So the council's doing a good job, but I think the evidence is not as strong as other people might assume it is, because we make assumptions in these spaces and we just run with what we think is best for the public services. So just underlining that I think the science is definitely not settled as I thought it was a few years ago. Thanks, convener.
Thanks for that, Paddy. Everybody's, you know, entitled to their own opinion, so thanks for your opinions there, Paddy. I don't see any other further names or hands up, colleagues, so can I then ask you to agree to the three recommendations on page 23? Is that agreed? Yep, I see thumbs up. Thanks very much for that. Colleagues, that now takes us on to item 5 on the agenda, which is actions taken relevant to rodent complaints. Again, I'm going to ask Andrew to come in and speak to us very briefly. Andrew?
Yep, thanks, convener. Yeah, this is the update paper which we bring every 6 months to committee, just to update on the actions taken relevant to rodent complaints throughout the council area. I can just draw your attention to a few things. The table in section 2.1 of the report, we'll be looking at the numbers of complaints that are coming in there, and it's suggesting by the end of the year we'll be approaching around about 2,000 complaints regarding rats and mice for private properties. And when we compare that with the previous year, taking into account that there has been free charging, a free service has been introduced and all charging has been removed, it's looking as if we'll be at almost a 250% increase in the number of calls that we received in comparison with the previous year. Now that would tend to suggest that yes, there has been a significant increase in rats throughout the council over the last year or so. But when we then look at the number of calls received from our own tenanted properties, who have always received a free service, we're actually projecting that the overall numbers of rat complaints are actually going to be slightly less than they were the previous year. So there is a bit of conflicting evidence there, but I would suggest that perhaps the numbers of rats throughout the council area are perhaps not as large as the explosions we thought we were seeing at the very start of the new policy. So just a sort of information on the actual numbers there. And again, if you still look at although we received a significant increase in the number of calls, we've actually still producing a very good response rate as well. Paragraphs 2.6 and 2.7 just highlight the works that are undertaken within some of the hotspot areas that have been identified, and we're doing that in conjunction with our colleagues in housing as well. And included in this will be a letter being issued to all the houses within these hotspot areas, and that will include the information leaflet which is contained in the appendix to the report as well. Paragraph 2.8 basically just details all the other work that's going on out with the hotspot areas, because we were that are subjected to problems with rats as well. So if I could just draw there's only 2 recommendations, really just to support the actions that have already been and will be undertaken, and also agree that a further report will come to committee in approximately 6 months' time. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Councillor Carragher. Tracy.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really on just to say that I welcome this report, and I'm glad that the data is being recorded now, because it's important that we've got a clear picture about what's going on across North Lanarkshire. Also, can I ask, because obviously Kirkshaw is going to be assessed last month and this month as the local ward member, I would really appreciate an update on that prior to the next committee. Obviously the next committee is after the next elections, but I would appreciate that being forwarded on to me. Thanks.
I'm sure that'll be done.
Yes, Councillor Atkin, what we'll do is I'll arrange one of the pest control team to give you a call just to give you a quick update on the outcome.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. I don't see any further questions in the chat bar. Don't see any hands up. So colleagues can then point you to the recommendations on page 43, which there's 2. I'll be happy to agree these recommendations. That's agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 6, which is the performance. The strategic performance phase within a framework, latest performance results from regulatory services and waste solutions. Now, colleagues, this paper's here for noting. Have we got any questions on it? I don't see anybody in the chat bar, don't see any hands up. We're happy to note the contents of that report, colleagues.
Michael, sorry, it says, is it item 6? It says approval.
Wait a minute, I'm getting mixed up, Tracy. Hold on. Item 6. So it does. Sorry about that. Andrew, do you want to come in and say anything about that?
Yeah, it's a routine report that comes every 6 months. Every service has its there's sort of key performance indicators that we need to report on, and this paper provides a sort of summary of those key performance indicators, and I'm happy to answer any questions from any elected member.
So have we got any questions, colleagues? Don't see any questions. Tracy, thanks very much for pointing that out. I was looking at the previous paper. Sorry about that. So we've got one recommendation, colleagues, and it's on page 49. Are we happy to agree with this recommendation? Great, thank you. Moving on to item 7, which is on pages 57. Just make sure I get this one right. Hold on. Oh, goodness sake. 57. And it's a strategic performance framework, and it's the environmental assets. Nicole, do you want to speak to this just briefly, please?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. No, similar to the report which Andrew has just introduced, again, this is the key performance indicators relating to the service areas within environmental assets. They're all there laid out fully, so happy to take any questions that any member may have on them.
Colleagues, do we have any questions? Willie Goldie.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a quick question. It's a kind of follow-up to one that I asked Nicole before. And it was just on page 60. Well, during the pandemic, there's been a shift away from burials towards cremations. Has this been a trend over years previous to that as well, Nicole? Is it the trend over the last while, or maybe the last decade or that? Just essentially, are we moving more from burials to cremations? Just if you have that information or that, or even just anecdotally would be fine.
Nicole?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'll give an answer anecdotally in terms of discussions we've had within the service. So in North Lanarkshire, traditionally, burial has very much featured highly in terms of how people wish to say good farewell to their friends and relatives. And that is a relatively unusual trend across the country. So what we've seen from, I guess, a very high uptake of burials is we've seen a very gradual decline, but that has been very, very marked from the onset of the pandemic. So we've moved from 60% in favour, roughly, of burials, 40% to cremation, and that has switched entirely during the pandemic. Now, our early analysis suggests there may be a number of reasons for that. For example, one of those reasons may well be, if members recall, at the outset of the pandemic, there were very strict guidelines in terms of how many people were allowed in a graveyard for a funeral, but actually not quite so strict in terms of attendance at a crematorium right at the outset. So a number of families went down the cremation route. But what we've yet to see is, as we emerge from the pandemic, as we move towards endemic, what that trend will actually look like. Will the sharp move towards cremations continue, or indeed will we see some levelling off? What I would say is that despite the fact that there has been a significant shift towards cremation, indeed our teams within the cemeteries haven't been any less busy, because obviously there have unfortunately been increased numbers of deceased residents who require to ensure receive a proper burial. So the cemeteries teams remain extremely busy, despite the fact that there has been an overall percentage decline in the use of burial.
Okay, thanks for that, Nicole. Molly, are you happy with that? Yep, okay. Colleagues, I don't see any further questions or hands up in the chat bar. So we've got one recommendation on page 57. I'll be happy to agree this report. Great, thank you. Takes us on to item 8, colleagues, which is contracts for approval. Now we've got A and B here. Both of them are here for approval. So has anyone got any questions on item 8A? Don't see any questions in the chat bar. Don't see any hands up. We're happy to approve quick 8A. Is that agreed? Yep, yep, okay. 8B, colleagues, any questions or anything on 8B? Don't see anything in the chat bar. Don't see any hands up. Are we happy to approve them, colleagues? Thank you. Moving on to item 9, contract modification for residual waste disposal from household waste recycling centres. Andrew, you're going to speak to this one.
Sorry, communicating off mute there. Yeah, it's a standard report. We're having to extend our existing contract by a period of 3 months, which will allow us to introduce a longer term solution for our residual waste from recycling centres. The reason for the extension, as opposed to having one in place before the termination of the current contract, we did go out to tender previously, where we sought to get tenders in for both the collection of the waste from our sites, as opposed to us having to deliver it, thinking we could perhaps generate efficiencies from that, compared with actually us delivering it to the sites all the time. The scoring method for that they came back would have really didn't satisfy meat. In other words, the most economically advantageous tender for the council, which would have seen us paying way over the odds for the disposal of that waste. The consequence was that we didn't award the tender and then have to go for this extension of 3 months. But we have a new tender out. It's actually just been received this week, and we will award after the 3-month period is up.
Thanks for that. Colleagues, this report is here for noting, but has anyone got any questions or comments on it? Don't see any in the chat bar, don't see any hands, so can we agree to note the contents? Thank you. The final item is item 10, which is contracts below committee approval threshold. Again, colleagues, this is here for noting. Are we happy to note this? We are. Thank you. Now, colleagues, just before we break up, can I just say, on behalf of Nora, my vice convener for the last couple of years, to thank the committee over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years of the very much hard work that's been done, and I think we've achieved quite a lot. We always haven't seen eye to eye, I've got to admit that, but where that's happened, we have worked tirelessly to make sure that we have made mistakes, yes we have, and we've made sure that we've rectified them as quickly as possible. Can I thank Andrew, Nicole, James, Kirsty, Fiona for today? These guys are behind the scenes. We don't see them that often, but they work tirelessly. But more importantly, no, just as importantly, can I thank the frontline staff from Waste Services? Absolutely do a fantastic job. Can I also thank our ground services, our cemetery staff, our green space staff, our country park staff, who all work absolutely fantastically well, and they make sure our communities are saved from harm, from all sorts of things, as well as the people in the environmental health teams, our trading standards teams, who are working their socks off at all times. Today, we're unfortunately without Robert Steenson. I would like to personally thank Robert, and I'll put it on record to thank Robert Steenson, as he's been a rock to me as a convener. Anytime I've had any issues, I just need to lift the phone and Robert will advise, and it's always the best advice. So guys, can I wish you all the very best? Whoever's going to be standing in May, can I wish you all the best? Genuinely hope that you all come back. And if you're not going to come back, I wish you all a very happy and long retirement. Thank you very much. Officers, can we stay on, please?